For my midterm presentation, I chose Booker T. Washington. Booker T. was born in 1856 in a slave hut in Virginia. His mom was an enslaved woman, and she worked as a cook for the plantation owner, and his dad was a white man. After emancipation, he and his family moved to West Virginia. At age 9, he started working first in a salt furnace and then in the coal mines. He did this to help support his family. Though he lived a very hard childhood, Booker T was determined to have an education, and a white man found him and how smart he was, and he helped him get into school. Washington had to work in the salt furnace from 4 to 9 in the morning before attending school, which was the Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute, now known as Hampton University in Virginia. This was one of the first all-black schools in America. While in school, he worked as a janitor to help pay his expenses. Booker T graduated in 1872 and went back to West Virginia, where he taught children during the day and adults at night. He did this for 2 years. Then he continued his studies at Wayland Seminary and then joined the teaching staff at Hampton. All of this laid a foundation for his later leadership. In 1881, Washington slowly started to build his own school, which would be an all-black school in Alabama. Washington wanted to provide an education and vocational training to African Americans, mainly skills that would help them become economically independent and self-sufficient. He had 2 other guys helping him, Campbell, who had been a former slave master, and Adams, who was a former slave. They started with nothing, no equipment and little money, though under this leadership the Institute grew vastly. They set up a wagon in town and were open to donations. Booker had to learn how to make bricks, and he eventually became the best brickmaker in their town. They had lots of help, which were mainly students, people younger than them. Tuskegee Institute became a testament to his hard work, as he died 34 years later. There were over 100 buildings and 38 professions involved. It provided students with valuable skills, but also helped students build the school's infrastructure because most of the buildings were built by students. Booker T thought that since whites needed things done in the agricultural department and blacks could do the work, that whites should be more favorable towards the blacks. Also, the black people were already in the United States, so why would they keep bringing immigrants in when the blacks were already there and could do the work? He said, "Don't work against us, work with us." Washington thought that this would improve their social status. Booker T also encouraged African Americans to take responsibility for their own progress, hard work. At this time, it was very dangerous to talk about civil rights, and jobs and education for blacks was very limited. Washington held a speech in Atlanta in which he spoke to mainly white people, and he said that the only way for blacks to advance would be to honor common labor. Booker T thought it would be better if blacks and whites stayed separate, as long as whites granted black men and women access to economic progress, education, and justice. He said, "The wisest of my race understand that the agitation of questions of social equality is the extremest folly, and that progress in the enjoyment of all of the privileges that will come to us must be the result of severe and constant struggle rather than artificial forcing. The opportunity to earn $1 in a factory just now is worth infinitely more than to spend $1 in the opera house." This means that blacks should take the opportunities they have because they should understand that they won't be seen as equal, but should go on with life as they already are. And he believed that economic independence and showing themselves as productive members of society would lead them to equality. And whites should provide job opportunities and support black education. These ideas and beliefs created support and criticism for Booker T. Washington. Though, of course, there are people who heard this and had a different standpoint, one being W.E.B. Du Bois. He thought that this approach was too passive. Booker T. and Du Bois's conflicting opinions were founded from their different backgrounds. Du Bois was born a free man and did not encounter Jim Crow South until he was in college. After this, he seen how bad it was, then he started advocating for equality. Du Bois published many influential works on African Americans, in which he had a chapter about conflicting views with Washington in one of his books. Du Bois believed that fighting for civil rights was more important, while Booker T. thought that it was better to raise money for the Tuskegee Institute and other black organizations. Other critics thought that Washington's focus on self-independence neglected social and political rights, or they did not like accepting segregation because they just felt like that it was delaying and pushing back the fight for civil rights. Or some of them just didn't like accepting segregation because they felt like they were gaining approval from the whites rather than authorizing African American rights. Though because of Washington's dominance and influence in the black community, most of the smaller and irrelevant opinions were quickly shattered. Teddy Roosevelt was known for his progressive views and his work to address social issues. Roosevelt and Booker T shared many of the same views. Roosevelt admired Booker T's thoughts on self-reliance rather than pushing for immediate rights. This aligned with Roosevelt's belief in hard work, and Roosevelt also respected Booker T's approach. In 1901, Roosevelt invited Booker T to a dinner at the White House. This would make Booker T the first African-American guest in the White House. Regarding the public, though, this was very controversial. The blacks believed that the dinner was a step towards racial inequality, but they also received significant repercussions, mainly from Southern politicians. They saw the dinner as an insult to their social rules. Many people thought that this would hurt Roosevelt's presidency. Even through all the backlash, though, Roosevelt still supported African American rights. Though he and Booker T had these similarities, some of Roosevelt's actions were politically motivated, whereas Washington focused on more long-term authorization through education and economics.